welcome to the From Nature to Nurture podcast. I am your host, Danielle, and we are here today with our 24th episode. Today is a folklore episode. Woo! I love the folklore episodes because learning about plants in this way is so different. There's a lot of value in learning about the chemical constituents in the plants and how they work in our body systems and like the right extract methods, but there's something really beautiful about getting to know the folklore and the interpersonal relationships between plant and human. One of my favorite things is hearing from people who have had very similar experiences with the same plant, but they have never met or they have been on opposite sides of the world. And it's just this beautiful unifying message that we get to learn from the plants in this really unique way. So today's episode is all about nettle. If you haven't listened to the last episode, that was all about the physical medicine of nettle, and today we're going to cover folklore, energy, and some fun plant stories. So, nettle is a plant that I personally grow, so I have a lot of personal experience with this plant. And one of the most fascinating things I find is that when you go to harvest nettle, you can be very firm and direct and confident in your picking it and not get stung, versus if you lightly brush up against it, that is when you get stung. And I think there's a really interesting message here where it teaches us about being present, being mindful, being very purposeful in how we move and act and talk in this world so that we are not rubbing up against people in the wrong way. Nettle has this quality of bringing us back to presence. And just today, I saw a clinical herbalist on Instagram that made a post about nettle specifically and about this presence. And I'm actually just going to read her post because she said it beautifully. Her name is Dana. She's a clinical herbalist. Her account is _wildkin. And this is what she says. This plant reminds you that you are here, in a body, in relationship with something that has its own terms. Slow down. Look before you reach. Move with intention. The sting calls you back into your hands, your breath, your feet on the ground. Nothing exists except this plant and this moment and the choice you're about to make. This is what relationship looks like. This is what embodiment looks like. Not extraction, not convenience, presence. And this is why I harvest barehanded. To nettle, for stinging me back awake and to the present moment every time. She said that so beautifully and perfectly, where nettle just teaches us so much about presence and boundaries, and it's so easy for us to disassociate and get stuck up in our heads and not be into our bodies, and nettle reminds us of that. So I wanted to start this podcast off with that because that is a beautiful message, and one that is, if you've if you've ever been stung by nettle before, you know that feeling. But let's look into some other fun stories. So we're looking at traditions throughout the world. Um, in Scandinavia, nettle is associated with Thor, the god of thunder, and burning nettles was believed to protect you from lightning and storms. Nettle was also worn as a amulet for protection against evil spirits. In Germanic lore, the stems were often used as protective charms against sorcery or harmful magic, and it was also a very common fiber, turning nettle into fiber for clothes, specifically for burial shrouds to protect the dead on their journey. And we will get into a story about that in a minute. um, and then in the British Isles, we have the belief that it was to dispel fear and to grant courage. There was also scourging rituals, which is where you lightly whip yourself or your livestock with nettles for health and protection. We talked a little bit about this in the last episode about the actual health benefits of that, but also just from an energetic sense of like this is a protection ritual. Then in Eastern Europe and Slavic traditions, nettle was believed to keep away dark forces and curses when hung over your doors and windows. In some Slavic tales, nettles were thrown into the fire to ward off storms or malevolent spirits. and then also woven into fishing nets for luck in the catch and to protect against water spirits. In Celtic and Irish lore, nettle is associated with strength and stamina, often tied to warriors. People would carry it as talismans for physical endurance and perseverance in challenges. In some Beltane rituals, nettles have been part of purification or boundary marking rituals. And then it's also said that dense nettle patches would mark fairy dwellings because their stings would protect against fairy mischief. And then in the 1800s in Scotland, um, it was said that the medicinal virtue of nettle lay in it being unspoken. No one must speak to the gatherer of it, and it must be collected at the hour of midnight. I thought that was so cool. But there's so many similar stories as we're going through all of this. You can kind of see it's a lot of like protection, endurance. It's a lot of protection, which is, I think all plants are protective, but it's really interesting when you see all these different cultures. We even have it being used as a cleansing herb in the Middle East, both physically and energetically, and was sometimes incorporated into protective baths. Um, and then in the Baltic regions, it was a symbolic purge plant, burning last year's dried nettle in the spring to cleanse the bad luck so that you're going into this new season um, cleansed. But we see a lot of protection, purification, and boundaries in all of this. There's also some fun little sayings around nettle, such as you can't get stung in a month that has an R in it. Definitely not true. And then there's some different folk tales around how to remove the nettle sting. It's said that if you rub yellow dock onto your sting, that it helps it go away. They do often grow side by side, but I haven't found that to be true, and I haven't found anyone that has a lot of like nettle interactions to say that that's true. And then it's also said that you could get rid of the nettle sting by washing it with vinegar, which sounds really painful actually. And I don't know if that actually works. I think the pain might of like the pain of the vinegar on like that open area would sting quite a bit. So maybe it's just a different type of sting, and so it feels different. Um, but let's read a story. This is called The Nettle Spinner, and it is a Flemish/Belgian fairy tale that talks a little bit about the transformation powers of nettle. I'm pretty sure this is an abridgment of the actual tale, so this might not be entirely accurate, but this is the one that I found. So here we go. A great lord was so cruel to his peasants that they called him Bouchard the Wolf. His wife was kind and generous and would secretly do good for those whom her husband wronged. One day, Bouchard saw a peasant woman named Renelde. He told her that if she came to the castle, he would make her the countess's lady maid. She refused because she had to look after her grandmother and was betrothed to the huntsman named Gilbert. He returned again, offering to make her a lady in waiting, and then dismissed the countess and said he would marry her. The last offer would not have moved her even if she had wanted to be the countess, because the countess has helped her when her grandmother was ill. Some time later, he saw her spinning flax and asked what she was about. She told him that she was making her wedding shift as she was to be married if he gave her his leave. He told her that she must spin nettles instead to make her shift and his death shroud, because she would not marry until he was laid in his grave. Gilbert offered to kill the count. Renelde refused because it would be murder, and besides, the countess had been kind to her. Her grandmother suggested that she tried spinning the nettles. She found that she could make good thread of them, and when Bouchard came by again, she showed him her shift. She began on his death shroud, and Bouchard fell ill that evening. He sent soldiers to throw her into the river, but she struggled to shore and went on spinning. Then they tied a stone to her neck, it released itself, and she made it to shore. The count had himself carried to the cottage. He was too ill to walk, and he tried to shoot her, but the bullet rebounded harmlessly. He broke the spinning wheel, but it was repaired the next day. He had her tied and set guards around her, but the guards fell asleep and the bonds untied themselves. He had every nettle uprooted, but they instantly sprouted again, even in her cottage. Every day the count grew worse, and the countess found out why. She asked Reneld to stop the sewing, and she did. The count recovered, but he still refused Reneld's permission to marry Gilbert. After a year, Gilbert left. Another year went by, and Bouchard fell ill again, though Reneld had not started spinning yet. He grew worse and longed for death, but could not die. Then he realized that his death shroud was not ready, so he sent word to Reneld to prepare it. His pains grew less as she spun, wove, and sewed. When she took the last stitch, he died. Soon after this, Gilbert returned. He still loved Reneld, and they got married. What a fun story. But you see the nettle's power in this story, right? You can see where, even in a historical context, nettle was used a lot for fiber. Um, we have all sorts of examples of that where like Napoleon's army uniforms were often made of nettles. It was said like in Scotland that your best tablecloth for Sunday was often made of nettles. It's a great fiber to work with, but we also see the transformative powers of nettle working as like a magical talisman of, making the count sick and then helping him be able to pass on in the end. Um, it's interesting that nettle has so many protection type benefits when we see in this story. It's kind of a bit of both. Like it was kind of protecting her from getting hurt in all the ways when he tried to stop her, but it also kind of helped protect the relationship that she had with Gilbert, where yeah, he had to leave for a while, but it all turned out fine where he came back in the end. And so that Bouchard could not get to Gilbert or really gets to them in the end. So really interesting story, and just fun little fairy tales and folklore like that are always really fun. But now I want to talk about the Nine Herbs charm. If you have not heard about this, this is from 10th century England in like the Anglo-Saxon time, and it was recorded in a healing manuscript. Now, I'm not going to read you the whole thing because it is very long and very rough because it's, Old English and it's been translated from Anglo-Saxon to English adjacent. It's very rough. But basically what it is a list of 9 sacred herbs that heal poison and disease, and there is a special way of putting these 9 herbs together to have this ultimate healing power. Now, the reason that I love the 9 herbs charm is because this is exactly how I practice herbalism. It's a great example where it is a combination of physical, scientific, medicinal compounds mixed with the esoteric, metaphysical, energetic side of herbalism. So this is some of the details of it. Nettle is one of the plants. There's actually some controversy around what the exact plants are. Some are unknown, some are speculated. But the ones that we are pretty confident on are mugwort, plantain weed, lamb's cress, chamomile, nettle, crabapple, and fennel. One of them might be chervil, and then one of them is pretty unknown. So 9 sacred plants, and there is a special way to mix them, and you pray over them, and you do this whole ritual. So I actually think I am going to read you the whole thing because it's wild. It's a really interesting part of history and something that I am super fascinated by, and I think even though it's a rough read, it teaches you a lot. So I'm actually going to read the whole thing. This translation is by J.S. Hopkins. There's a lot of different translations. I really like this one because you can buy a PDF that they created that is also filled with a bunch of original art that is absolutely stunning. But they also go over some of the historical context. They show you multiple different translations. Like I said, this is an Old Anglo-Saxon originally. And then they talk about, why they think certain plants are certain plants. Because, like I said, none of them are straightforward. So I'm going to go ahead and read you this now. Remember, mugwort, what you brought to pass when you readied at Regenmeld. You're called Una, the most ancient plant. You defeat 3, you defeat 30. You defeat venom, you defeat air illness. You defeat the horror that stalks the land. And you, way-bred plant mother, you're open to the east, yet mighty within. Carts creak over you, women rode over you brides bellowed, over you bulls snorted. You withstood it all, and you pushed back. You withstood venom, you withstood air illness, you withstood the horror that who travels the land. Now this plant is called Stoon, she who grows on stone. She defeats venom, she grinds away pain. She's called Stiff, she who withstands venom. She chases away malice, casts out pain. This is the plant that fought against the worm. She is mighty against venom. She is mighty against air illness. She is mighty against the horror who travels over the land. You, venom loath, go now. The less from the great from the less, until for both he receives a remedy. Remember, chamomile, what you brought to pass, what you accomplished at Allerford, that no one should lose their life to disease, since for him chamomile was prepared. Finally, this plant is known as Wargaloo, who a seal sent over sea ridges to aid against venom. These 9 plants defeat 9 venoms. A worm came slithering, and yet he killed no one. For wise Woden took 9 glory twigs and smote the serpent, who flew into 9 parts. Their apple overcame venom. There the worm would never find shelter. Fillet and fennel, a most mighty pair. The wise Lord shaped these plants, while he, holy, hung in the heavens. He sent them from the 7 worlds, 7 ages of men, for wretched and wealthy alike. She stands against pain, she stands against venom. She is portent against 3 and against 30. Against a foe's hand, against great guile, against malice and bewitchment, from animal and spirit. Now, may the 9 plants do battle against 9 glory fleers, against 9 venoms and against 9 air diseases, against the red venom, against the running venom, against the white venom, against the blue venom, against the yellow venom, against the green venom, against the black venom, against the blue venom, against the brown venom, against the purple venom, against the worm blister, against the water blister, against thorn blister, against thistle blister, against ice blister, against venom blister. If any venom comes flying from the east, or any comes from the north, or any from the south, from the west over folk, Christ stood over illness of every kind, yet I alone know running water while the 9 serpents guard. Now may all plants arise, seas ebb, all salt water, while I blow this venom from you. Mugwort, oh my gosh. Mugwort, waybread, open to the east, lamb's crest, venom loaf, chamomile, nettle, sour apple of the wood, fillet and fennel, old soap. Prepare and apply the salve. Work these plants to dust, then mix them with apple mush. Make a paste of water and ashes. Take fennel and mix the plant into the boiling paste. Bathe the wound with an egg mixture both before the patient applies the salve and after. Sing the above galder over each of the 9 plants. Sing the galder 3 times before the patient self-applies the salve, and sing the galder 3 times on the apple. Sing the galder into the patient's mouth. Sing the galder into each of the patient's ears. And before the patient applies the salve, sing the galder into the patient's wound. That's the whole thing. Whoo! I am sorry. That was rough, and I am not re-recording that because that was a rough thing to read. So everything before started listing the plants at the end here when I said mugwort, wave bread, open to the east, lamb's cress, venom, loaf, chamomile, nettle, sour apple of the woods, fillet and fennel, and old soap. Everything before that is considered the galder. So you sing that over each plant, so that's already 9 times. Then you sing it 3 times before the patient self-applies, so we're up to 12, right? Um, that's 12 times. Then you sing it over the apple 3 more times, so 15 times we're at. Then you sing it over the mouth, both of the ears, and in the wound. So that's 19 times total that you would say that whole thing over and over and over. Let me tell you, the tongue twister of the against the white venom and against the blue venom, and oh my gosh, you probably hear me laughing. But I'm going to go back and I'm going to read you specifically just the nettle section, just to pinpoint it. Now this plant is called stoon, she who grows on stone, she defeats venom and grinds away pain. She's called stith, she understands, she who withstand venom, she chases away malice, casts out pain. Whew. Um, really, really interesting piece of history here. And I think that it's really fascinating how some of the plants we don't know, some of the plants we have guesses. So it's really, really, I don't know what else to say other than it's really interesting. It's one of my favorite things in like the herbal mystery world. And I think hope one day we can kind of figure it out. Um, but with all of that said, we don't know entirely what the salve was for. It said that it was basically a cure-all for everything. But with this mix of plants, it's really interesting trying to figure out like, okay, like mugwort, plantain, nettle, lamb's crest, apples, chamomile, um, maybe chervil. That's one of the ones we're not sure about. Fennel. It's a really interesting selection of plants. Yeah, so thank you for sticking with me there while I read that because that is rough. But like I said, there's a bunch of different translations, so you can find some that are maybe a little more clear. I think this one is close to the most historically accurate one. And like I said, it's filled with beautiful pictures of the plants and goes into a lot more information. Getting back to nettle in general. So we've seen some themes with nettle, and so here are some different ways that I like to work with nettle personally. Um, Outside of, I already talked about how I add nettle to most of my teas, but there's multiple layers there. We have all of the vitamins and minerals, but I also love to add it just for the protective element, for the cleansing element. So some different ways to work with this. You can add nettle to little protective sachets as kind of as we heard in some of the history where people would hang nettle around their doors and their windows or to carry on your person. People even carried nettle for energy and stamina, like we talked about in like the Celtic area. So another good reason to kind of have nettle on you at all times. You can also create a spring nettle infusion for personal renewal. And so we're kind of working with that spring vitality. I mean, you can do it any time of year, but now's a really good year because your nettles are really happy and healthy before they're starting to get stripped by the sun and whatnot. But to make like a personal blend for yourself that is like an energetic cleansing, giving you more vitality and energy and presence. You can also work with it symbolically on your altar or for seasonal celebrations if you need some extra protection, like adding it to like a salt for like a salt circle or even just doing different types of baggies with different herbs. And then makes a great guardian during transitions. So this could be tea, infusing an oil, burning it, and having the smoke cleanse or smoke kind of renewal to kind of help you through these transitional seasons specifically, or if you're going through a personal life transition. But nettle is a staple plant for me for all of the reasons from last episode and this. It's something I always have on hand. It's something that I always grow, and something that I will always grow as long as I live in an area that it will grow in, which I don't foresee changing. But it's a beautiful plant that has a lot to offer us, and I hope that you find a way to incorporate nettle in your life, whether it is for medicinal or energetic purpose. And I highly recommend that you look more into the Nine Herbs charm because it's a wonderful, beautiful mystery. And I hope that you guys try to read it out loud to someone else because that's always fun. And if you have any personal nettle stories or messages, I'd love to hear them. Like I said in the intro, it's fascinating to me, the person to plant relationship. So please, please, please send your stories along. If you would like to find out more about my upcoming classes and offerings, you can find me at rootandwandercollective.com. I'll see you along the plant path.